This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the roles of the U.S. and Canada in World War II's European theater.
Mm-hmm.
You might think you know this story, but we've got a whole stack of sources here.
Yeah.
First-hand accounts, historical analyses.
Oh, wow.
Even some pretty heated debates between historians.
Well,
And they reveal some surprises you might not expect.
that's right.
Yeah.
We're going beyond just this happened, then that happened.
Yeah.
You're really trying to dig into the why, trying to understand all the complexities and the human stories
Yeah.
within this massive global conflict. That's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Okay, so let's set the stage. World War II.
Right?
Europe, Allied powers versus Nazi Germany and the Axis powers.
Right.
We hear a lot about the European nations involved, and rightfully so. But what about the contributions of the U.S. and Canada?
Yeah.
Were they just kind of supporting roles?
Right.
Or were they truly essential for the Allied victory?
Good question.
That's what we're here to find out.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is how both countries started the war in very different places.
Okay.
The U.S., for example, was initially really hesitant to get involved at all.
Mm-hmm.
They were holding on to this isolationist stance
Right.
all the way until the attack on Pearl Harbor
Right.
in December 1941.
Right, but here's a twist. Even before Pearl Harbor,
Okay.
the U.S. was already supporting their allies through the Lend-Lease Act of 1941. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
Sending supplies, weapons, really anything to
Yeah.
help fight fascism,
Yeah.
even before officially joining the war.
I think what's really important here is that the Lend-Lease Act
Yeah.
shows a commitment to opposing fascism that runs deeper than just strategic calculations.
Right.
It just speaks to a sense of shared values
Mhm.
and a recognition of the threat posed by Nazi Germany.
Yeah. Okay, so then Pearl Harbor happens,
Right.
and that's when American military might really kicks into gear.
Yeah.
We're talking major campaigns, Operation Torch in North Africa in 1942, the invasion of Sicily in 1943,
Yeah.
the long and grueling Italian campaign from 43 to 44,
Right.
which ultimately led to the liberation of Rome.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget the big one,
Yeah.
D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
D-Day was a turning point in the war.
Yeah.
Operation Overlords, the Allied invasion of Normandy, was massive in scale.
Yeah.
American troops landed on Omaha and Utah beaches, facing really intense resistance, especially at Omaha.
Wow.
We actually came across a soldier's diary from the 1st Infantry Division
Really?
that described Omaha Beach as a living hell.
Oh, wow.
It paints a really vivid picture of the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought there.
Wow, that's powerful. It's hard to even imagine what those soldiers went through.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just boots on the ground, right? The U.S. earned its nickname the Arsenal of Democracy for a reason.
Right.
Remember that Lend-Lease program we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out they were pumping out an incredible amount of military equipment to all the Allied nations.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking numbers that are almost impossible to grasp.
The sheer scale of American industrial output during World War II is staggering.
Yeah.
They were producing Sherman tanks, P-51 Mustang fighter planes, those iconic B-17 Flying Fortress bombers.
Right.
And it wasn't just about quantity.
Yeah.
American manufacturing also led to key technological advancements
Right.
that played a crucial role in the Allied victory.
Okay, so the U.S. is this industrial powerhouse.
Yeah.
Pumping out weapons and fighting on multiple fronts. But what about Canada?
Yeah.
They're often called the unsung hero of WWII.
Right.
And our sources really seem to back that up.
Yeah.
They were in it from the start, declaring war in 1939, shortly after Britain. Why do you think they were so quick to join the fight?
I think it speaks to their close ties to Britain
Okay.
and their sense of shared values. They recognized the threat posed by Nazi Germany early on
Yeah.
and were willing to stand up and fight for what they believed in.
And they didn't shy away from taking risks,
Yeah.
even if it meant setbacks.
Yeah.
One event that really stands out is the Dieppe raid in August 1942. This daring amphibious assault on the German-occupied port of Dieppe, France,
Right.
ended in disaster with really heavy casualties.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a pointless sacrifice.
No, it wasn't.
We found some historical analyses that suggest that the lessons learned at Dieppe
Right.
were actually crucial for later amphibious operations, especially D-Day.
Absolutely. Dieppe highlighted the need for better planning,
Oh.
coordination, and specialized equipment for amphibious assaults.
Mm-hmm.
The Allies learned the hard way, but those lessons were applied to future operations,
Yeah.
ultimately contributing to the success of D-Day.
So Dieppe, while a tragedy,
Yeah.
ultimately paved the way for future victories.
Right.
And speaking of D-Day,
Yeah.
Canadian troops played a vital role there too, right?
Yes, they landed at Juno Beach on D-Day,
Mm-hmm.
facing fierce resistance just like the Americans at Omaha. They secured key objectives
Yeah.
and played a critical role in the overall success of the invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And their fight didn't end there.
Okay.
They continued pushing forward,
Wow.
liberating key cities in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
including Amsterdam and Rotterdam.
Wow.
Their impact was felt across the European theater.
It's amazing how much they accomplished despite having a smaller population and military compared to the U.S. And just like the U.S., their contributions went beyond just sending troops.
Right.
Canada had its own industrial machine, producing vehicles, artillery, even aircraft like Hawker Hurricanes and Curtiss P-40s. And get this, they were churning out these little ships called corvettes,
Oh, yeah?
which were essential for protecting convoys from German U-boats in the Atlantic.
Those corvettes were workhorses. They played a vital role in keeping the supply lines open,
Right.
ensuring that food, weapons, and other essential goods could reach Britain and the other Allied forces.
Yeah. Both countries were pulling out all the stops.
Yeah.
Not just militarily, but economically as well.
Right.
And that's what we'll dive into next.
Okay.
Because it turns out the U.S. and Canada weren't just supplying weapons and soldiers. They were essentially helping to keep the entire Allied war machine running.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
We'll explore how their economic support,
Right.
from food shipments to financial aid,
Oh, yeah.
was just as crucial as their military contributions. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're unraveling the often overlooked story of the U.S. and Canada's involvement in World War II's European theater. As we learned in the first part, their contributions were far more than just sending troops.
Right.
They were powering the Allied war effort on multiple fronts.
Exactly. And now we're going to delve into a side of their involvement that's often overlooked.
Yeah.
The economic front.
Right.
It turns out their economic support was just as crucial as their military might.
So paint us a picture. What did this economic support look like?
Well, imagine this Britain under constant attack, struggling to feed its people
Right.
and keep its economy afloat. That's where the U.S. stepped in.
Okay.
They shipped enormous amounts of food across the Atlantic.
Wow.
We're talking millions of tons of wheat, meat, dairy,
Yeah.
everything you could imagine. One source we looked at compared it to a lifeline,
Really?
keeping Britain from starving.
Wow. That's a powerful image. So the U.S. was essentially keeping Britain fed.
Yeah,
What about Canada? Did they play a role in this as well?
absolutely. Canada stepped up too, becoming a major supplier of food and resources to Britain.
Mm-hmm.
They were shipping wheat, lumber,
Okay.
even munitions.
Yeah.
Their contribution was significant,
Yeah.
especially considering their smaller population and economy compared to the U.S.
It's incredible how these two countries mobilized their resources to support the Allied cause.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about food, right? There was also a lot of financial aid involved.
That's right. Both the U.S. and Canada provided billions of dollars in financial assistance to Britain and other allied nations.
Mm-hmm.
This helped them purchase essential supplies,
Right.
keep their economies afloat,
Yeah.
and continue fighting the war.
It's like they were saying, we've got your back.
Mm.
And this wasn't just government to government, right? We found some fascinating information about how everyday citizens in both countries got involved as well.
You're thinking of those war bond drives?
Right.
And the victory loan campaign?
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
People from all walks of life lined up to buy war bonds,
Wow.
contributing their hard-earned money to support the war effort.
Yeah.
It was a true display of national unity
Right.
and a shared commitment to the cause.
You know, it's inspiring to see how ordinary people stepped up during such a difficult time.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about governments and armies.
Right.
It was about entire societies coming together to fight for freedom and democracy.
Absolutely. And Canada's mutual aid agreement really exemplifies that spirit of generosity.
Oh, yeah.
They were providing billions of dollars worth of supplies to Britain and other allies without expecting any repayment.
Wow, talk about putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
It's clear that both the U.S. and Canada were deeply committed to supporting the Allied cause,
Yeah.
both on the battlefield and on the home front. But as we dig deeper into the historical analyses of their involvement,
Right.
things get a bit more complicated.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's one thing to acknowledge the contributions,
Right.
but understanding the why behind those contributions
Yeah.
is where things get really interesting. Historians have been debating the motivations of the U.S. and Canada for decades,
Mm-hmm.
and there are some fascinating perspectives to consider.
Okay, so let's unpack those perspectives.
Okay.
We know there's the traditionalist view, which
Mhm.
emphasizes the moral imperative to fight tyranny and defeat fascism.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the other perspectives? What are they saying?
Well, you have the revisionists
Okay.
who challenge that simplistic good versus evil narrative.
All right.
They argue that the U.S., in particular, had its own economic and geopolitical interests at stake.
So it's less about altruism and more about national self-interest. That's a bold claim.
It is.
Yeah.
But they make some compelling points.
Okay.
They point to things like the U.S.'s growing economic ties with Europe,
Mm-hmm.
their desire to maintain a balance of power on the world stage,
Right.
and even the potential for economic gain through wartime production.
But didn't the Lend-Lease Act kind of contradict this idea of pure self-interest?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the U.S. was sending aid before they even officially entered the war.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where the post-revisionist perspective comes in.
Okay.
They acknowledge those strategic considerations,
Right.
but also recognize the genuine desire to support the fight against fascism. It's like they're saying, hey, it's complicated.
Yeah, human motivations are rarely purely altruistic or purely selfish. It's usually a mix of both, right?
Exactly. And the post-revisionist view emphasizes the importance of considering all these factors.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the complexities of international relations
Mm-hmm.
and the various motivations that drive national decisions.
Okay, so we've got the traditionalists, the revisionists, and the post-revisionists.
Right.
But there's another perspective we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
The Marxist perspective. What do they bring to the table?
The Marxist perspective adds another layer of complexity by bringing in the ideas of class struggle
Okay.
and imperialism. They argue that conflicts like World War II are ultimately driven by the struggle between different economic classes
Mm-hmm.
and the pursuit of power by capitalist nations.
So from that perspective, the war is less about fighting for freedom
Right.
and more about powerful nations vying for control and resources.
Essentially, yes.
Hmm.
And while this perspective might seem radical to some,
Yeah.
it does offer a different lens through which to view the conflict.
Yeah.
It challenges us to consider the broader economic and social forces
Right.
that contribute to global conflicts.
It's fascinating to see how different historians interpret the same events in such different ways. It really highlights the complexity of history and the importance of critical thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these debates are not just about the past.
Right.
They have implications for how we understand the present and the future.
Right. So we've got all these different interpretations, all these
Mhm.
different whys behind the U.S. and Canada's involvement in World War II.
Right.
But what does this all mean for us today?
Yeah.
Why should we care about these historical debates?
That's a great question. And one we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into the lasting legacies of these contributions,
Right.
how they shaped the relationship between the U.S. and Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and how they continue to influence our understanding of World War II today. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey.
We have.
From those intense battles and the industrial powerhouses churning out weapons
Yeah.
to the complex motivations behind the U.S. and Canada's involvement in World War II. But now we're turning our attention to something a bit different, the lasting impact of their shared wartime experience.
Yeah, it's fascinating to consider how a global conflict with
Yeah.
all its destruction and hardship
Mm-hmm.
could forge a stronger bond between nations.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of the U.S. and Canada, it seems to have done just that.
We've already talked about their economic ties during the war, like
Uh-huh.
the Lend-Lease Act and Canada's mutual aid agreement.
Mm.
But did those collaborations continue after the war ended?
Absolutely.
Gone.
In fact, they expanded in many ways.
Okay.
The post-war era saw a surge in trade and economic partnerships between the two countries.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the auto industry, for example.
Yeah.
You had integrated supply chains
Right.
spanning the U.S.-Canada border
Yeah.
with parts and vehicles flowing back and forth.
Right. And it wasn't just cars.
Yeah.
There were also collaborations in energy,
Yeah.
aerospace, and countless other sectors.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the war really paved the way for a deeply interconnected economic relationship.
Exactly. And this economic interdependence has only grown stronger over the decades.
Wow.
Today, the U.S. and Canada are each other's largest trading partners,
It's incredible.
with billions of dollars in goods and services crossing the border every year.
Wow.
It's a testament to the enduring legacy of their wartime collaboration.
Okay, so it's safe to say that World War II had a lasting impact on their economic ties.
Hmm.
But what about politically? Did the war bring them closer together on the world stage as well?
It definitely seems that way.
Okay.
In the aftermath of World War II, both countries emerged as key players in shaping the post-war world order.
Right.
They were instrumental in the formation of international organizations like the United Nations and NATO, sharing a commitment to promoting democracy,
Yeah.
free trade, and global security. It's like they went from fighting side by side on the battlefield
Right.
to working together to build a more peaceful and stable world.
That's quite a shift from the isolationist stance the U.S. held before the war.
Yeah.
What do you think caused that change?
I think the war experience, the shared sacrifices, and the common victory fostered a sense of collective responsibility for global affairs.
Yeah.
They realized that they couldn't simply retreat back into isolationism.
Right.
They had to actively engage with the world to prevent another global catastrophe.
Right.
And this shared commitment to international cooperation
Yeah.
also solidified their alliance as key partners in the Western Bloc during the Cold War.
Right. The Cold War, that was another defining chapter in their relationship. Standing together against a common adversary must have further strengthened their bond.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Facing the threat of the Soviet Union brought them even closer together,
Yeah.
both militarily and politically. And while there have been disagreements and points of friction over the years,
Right.
the U.S.-Canada relationship has remained remarkably strong and stable.
Yeah.
It's one of the most enduring and successful bilateral relationships in the world.
It's a testament to the enduring legacy of that shared wartime experience. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that the roles of the U.S. and Canada in World War II extended far beyond the battlefield. They helped to shape the course of the war,
Right.
fostered a deep and lasting bond between the two nations,
Yeah.
and continue to influence the world we live in today.
Yes. Their story is a reminder that history is not just about the past.
Right.
It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our present and will continue to influence our future.
It's also a reminder of the power of collaboration and shared purpose.
Yeah.
Even in the face of unimaginable challenges,
Yeah.
these two nations came together, pooling their resources and their courage to fight for a better future.
Yeah.
And that legacy of cooperation continues to inspire us today.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
As the world faces new challenges and uncertainties, what lessons can we draw from the wartime collaboration between the U.S. and Canada? What insights can we glean from their shared commitment to democracy,
Right.
freedom, and international cooperation?
Good question.
These are questions worth considering as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into a fascinating chapter of history. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.